Unfortunately, because I was working without a work permit, I got arrested in Thailand.
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reka and I am your host. I hope you are enjoying your day as you're listening to this podcast. If you are a returning listener of the podcast, welcome back. I am so happy that you continue to come back. And if you are new to this podcast, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. So this podcast is called Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast, where I interview full-time yoga teachers from across the globe. Sometimes I do interview teachers who's not completely full-time or who used to be full-time, because I think these stories and information journeys that people I interview share are very valuable stories to hear. And they offer amazing lessons that they learn that we can learn something from or we can take away from. By any means, I'm trying to promote being a full-time yoga teacher is the path to be taken as a yoga teacher, or being a full-time is better than being a part-time teacher. So that's not what I'm trying to promote in this podcast. I just remember when I first became a yoga teacher, I kind of went straight on with becoming a full-time teacher, and I just wanted to figure out how to be a full-time teacher. I wanted to speak to other full-time yoga teachers, learn about their journey, how they made it to where they are, and what has worked for them, and what are some challenges they came across. So that's kind of why I started this podcast, so I can learn from other full-time teachers how they are making this their reality, because it's not an easy path. And I also want to highlight that it's not an easy path, and it's also not the path for all yoga teachers. You don't have to be a full-time yoga teacher. Sometimes being a full-time yoga teacher, we have to rely our full income and our living from teaching yoga. And for some people, that can take some passion away from yoga. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I'm not trying to promote being a full-time yoga teacher is the better path or the only path for yoga teachers out there. So I will be interviewing and releasing episodes of people who's not a full-time or who used to be full-time and they chose another path. And I think that's also a great story worth sharing. But for me, as a full-time yoga teacher who's been teaching this as my full-time career for quite some time, it's interesting to speak to other full-time teachers who's been doing this. I learn a lot, and I also get inspired from their stories, and also their stories make me feel like I am not alone in this world of being a full-time yoga teacher, which I hope anyone listening to this podcast can also feel like you're not alone in this path. Sometimes being a yoga teacher can be challenging, obviously, but also lonely. It might sometimes feel like lonely path. So what I'm hoping from this podcast is that you can feel like you're not alone. There are amazing community of yoga teachers across the globe who love yoga so much, and they have found an interesting, unique way to make this into a living. Whether you choose to become full-time yoga teacher or whether you choose to step away from full-time yoga teacher, I hope this podcast can be inspiring to you, or you can learn some wisdoms, golden nuggets from these teachers that I interview and share their story. Anyway, that's a long intro today about the podcast, but I do want to make a few announcements before I introduce today's episode. First, I am celebrating a 4-year anniversary of my online yoga studio. I started teaching online yoga during the pandemic, decided to open my own online yoga studio, and we are celebrating the 4-year anniversary, which I'm very excited about. I am so proud of and so grateful for my online yoga community. I'm having 2 different celebrations that I hope you can join both, or one. I'm doing an online celebration called Day of Gratitude that is going to be on Saturday, November 2nd from 9 a.m. California time. and we'll just practice yoga together. We'll do a little bit of meditation, gratitude meditation, and I will be giving out raffle prizes. One of the raffle prize is a yoga mat towel from a company called Unalome or Unlome. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm sorry, but they have generously gifted us a beautiful yoga mat towel that I could use for a prize. So that'll be one of the prize. Another prize is a yoga tune-up ball, which is myofascial release balls. That's going to be super beneficial for anybody, but especially if you are movement lovers. It's a great way to self-massage, and I also teach once a month myofascial release in a yoga class on my online studio, so that'll come very handy for you if you ever want to come join me for that class. I will be also giving out 1 month membership to my online yoga studio as well as 5 class pack. I hope you could make it. All you have to do is come to the celebration, stay till the end for your name to be in the raffle to see if you can win these prizes. There might be a few more prizes that I haven't confirmed yet, but it's coming. So I hope you can make it. It'll be fun. You can join from any time zone. And another celebration I'm doing is on Sunday, November 3rd, from 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. in Long Beach, California. And this celebration is in-person celebration. We'll meet at the park on the grassy area. We'll practice yoga. I'll be teaching yoga from 10 a.m. And my friend Carlos, he is going to be playing live music during my yoga class. And he is going to give you a nice, beautiful sound bath, Shavasana, at the end. I'll be making cacao drink from pure cacao I brought home from Peru. And we'll pass around the cacao after our yoga and sound bath experience. And we can kind of go around and say what we are grateful for and share this cacao drink together. So I hope you can make it. Both events are free. Donations are welcome, which is going to cover the cost of organizing and running this event. But it is also free to join. I hope you can make it. I would love to see you either online or in person or both. So that's happening this weekend. Another announcement is that my dear friend Brittany, who I also interviewed in this podcast, she is going to be teaching a workshop called The Art of Teaching Private Yoga. And she has built a successful full-time yoga teacher business from offering only private yoga and only working with private clients. She is a Pilates instructor, yoga teacher, as well as yoga therapist, and have so much continuing education under her belt. And she is just the perfect person to teach this workshop because she just learned so much from doing it. She has so much firsthand experiences, trials and errors that she have accumulated so that she can really pass this amazing information on for any yoga teachers or just fitness instructors, Pilates instructors, or even physical therapists or any fitness instructors who is interested in offering more private one-on-one work. I think we'll get so much out of this workshop. This is happening on Sunday, November 3rd from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time, which is 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. This is part of my mentorship program for yoga teachers. So people who's in my mentorship program, this workshop is included in their membership. And I am opening up registration for non-members who just want to drop in on this workshop. So don't miss this chance to learn from Brittany about becoming a better and smarter and more aware private yoga teacher. So that's my announcement for now. So let's get started on this week's episode. This week I interviewed an amazing yoga teacher. Her name is Arbely. Arbely was introduced to me from Alina. Alina's interview was released several weeks ago. She is a yoga teacher that I worked together with for 4 months in Peru teaching yoga teacher trainings. And Arbely and Alina worked together in Peru the year before. And Alina recommended I interview Arbely because she's been traveling around the world teaching yoga. So I was so excited to get in touch with her so I could, share her journey, her stories with all of you. So I hope you'll enjoy her story. She has a very unique, amazing stories of being a traveling yoga teacher. So here's a little bit about Arbely. Arbely is a trilingual teacher from Mexico and Montreal, brings over 15 years of yoga teaching experience to her global community. Starting in competitive rhythmic gymnastics at a young age, she later discovered Modo yoga at 18, a practice that reshaped her relationship with her body and set her on the path to becoming a teacher. Since 2021, Arbely has led teacher trainings across Canada, Peru, and Thailand. With over 1,000 hours of yoga education, a deep-rooted Ashtanga practice, and compassionate yet firm teaching approach, she makes yoga accessible to all. So I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Arbely, and I will speak to you on the other side. Welcome, Arbely, to Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Our mutual friend, Alina, who was on the podcast recently, she has introduced us over Instagram, and she recommended that I interview you for this podcast. And for the little bit that I was following you on Instagram, I'm so excited to talk to you because I just have so many questions about your traveling and teaching life journey and your career. So I just want to say thank you for being here, and tell the listener, where are you located right now?
Thank you so much for having me on. Yes, Alina told me so many good things about you, and you guys were teaching in Peru together. So I'm so excited to dive into all things yoga. Right now I'm in Bali. So I just arrived here a week ago, I would say.
And are you in Bali are you teaching there? Are you studying? Are you learning? What's your plan in Bali?
So my plan is to finally settle down here. I've been traveling the world for 17 months, teaching yoga, and I've been in a new country every 2 months. And I decided to finally just settle down. And this is my 4th time in Bali, and I've always felt like pulled to it. So I decided to come here and just live here. There's a new studio that's opening up next month, so I'm going to start teaching there.
Wow. I'm very excited to hear about this 17-month journey of traveling. But maybe backing up a little bit, where are you originally from?
So I was born in Mexico, Sonora, which is the northwest part of Mexico, close to Baja California. And then I moved to Montreal, Quebec, when I was 5 years old with my parents and my 2 brothers. And we moved there because my father received a scholarship to study his PhD in Montreal. So we moved there.
Wow. What was his PhD on?
It was in finance.
Uh-huh. And how many languages do you speak?
So Spanish is my mother tongue, and then I learned English and French in kindergarten when I was 5.
Wow. I love that. I love, hearing other people's quite diverse and international background as well, because I also kind of grew up in different places. So when did you first started to practice yoga?
I found yoga when I was 18 years old, and I was living in Montreal, and I was studying cégep, which it's a little different than the rest of Canada or the States, where in Montreal we have grade 7 to 11 is high school, and then we have 2 years of cégep, which is like a prep period before going into university. So it's like you get the chance to specialize in something before going into university, but it's so that the leap from high school to university doesn't feel as intense. So I was studying cégep at the time in theater and studio arts. And then I had a friend of mine just say, let's go to yoga together. But I didn't want to go because I grew up as a competitive rhythmic gymnast. So my idea of what yoga was at the time was that it was just stretching or boring or maybe just for older people. And I had a very like physically intense training from gymnastics, and I was not attracted to yoga at all. So I kept saying no, but she kept insisting. And she was like, it's just $20 for 1 week of introductory yoga. Just come try it out. If you don't like it, just don't go back. And I kind of dragged myself to go, and I just rolled my eyes and I said, fine, I'll go. And I went, and it was a hot yoga studio called Moksha Yoga at the time, not what now is Moto Yoga. So it's like a franchise where two Canadians, they created this sequence founded originally Bikram, but then they changed the sequence to make it more accessible. So I went and I loved it. And I just kept practicing every day since then.
Wow. So you had a rhythmic gymnastic background. How old were you when you started the gymnastic?
I was 9 years old when I started it, and I loved the sport from the beginning. And I got into competing. It was a huge part of my growing up and my identity. But then I developed like mental health issues because of the pressure of the sport, and with the environment can be quite toxic when you are at like an elite level, and also with sports that are very based on body image and performing and how you look. So that was very detrimental to my mental health. And I became depressed when I got into clinically diagnosed at 13, but it started before that. And I was also diagnosed with anorexia. So I was just suffering a lot throughout most of my entire teenage years. And then when I quit the sport, I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. So I was looking for something else to replace gymnastics. And I did a bunch of sports, and nothing really filled it like yoga did. So when I found yoga, I felt like I came home, and I felt like I healed myself to a different degree that I had never experienced before in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. I love how you said that it felt like coming home when you started to practice yoga. Once you started practicing and you got really into it, how did you start to feel like you wanted to become a teacher, yoga teacher?
So I knew I wanted to be a teacher just 4 months after practicing, actually. And what's funny is that how I feel about the practice now and how I felt back then, even though it's been 17 years of practice, I am just as passionate about it now as I was on that day one. And of course, the relationship with the practice change, and the texture and everything, the dynamics of the practice change. But that passion I felt was there from the beginning, meaning like I never dabbled with it, or it was never just a side thing for me. Like I just dove right in, and I knew this is what I wanted to dedicate my life to since I started practicing. I didn't even feel the need to study university because I felt like I just wanted to teach yoga. But I still went anyways, and I got a kinesiology degree to help with the yoga. But I would say 4 months after, I knew I wanted to teach.
Wow, that's such it's so beautiful to hear, just to hear that from the beginning, you really felt like this is something you really wanted to dedicate your life to. And you even chose your major because of yoga. So I'm sure, and studying kinesiology and becoming a yoga teacher, I'm sure those two knowledge really fit so well together.
Yeah.
And what was your first 200-hour teacher training like?
You know what? I did a 500-hour teacher training to start.
Oh, wow.
And And I went to India, to Kerala, when I was 19 years old. And it was through the same studio that I was practicing with in Montreal. So they were offering a teacher training in India, and I wanted to do it. So I was studying. Back then, I was studying English literature, but the program wasn't that enticing. So I dropped out of university and I decided to work and save money and then go to India. That trip, it was 1 month, and that was the 200 hours was 1 month in Kerala. And then 10 months later, it was long distance projects that you receive your 500 hour over a year long period.
Oh, that sounds such an interesting teacher training format. And so amazing you went to India for 1 month as a 19-year-old. How was going to India? What was your going to India experience like, your first time going there? And I'm also curious about the teacher training, since it was from the studio that you were practicing in Montreal. Was it the same style of yoga, the teacher training program?
Yes. So it was what was then Moksha Yoga and what is now, they changed the name to Moto Yoga. So it was a hot yoga, and we practiced the sequence in a shala there twice a day. And it was intense days, 6 days a week. We would wake up, and I was sharing a bungalow with another Canadian. We were actually 50 students in the teacher training. So it was a big number. And we were all Canadians, but there was just one American girl because the founders are Canadian. So it's mostly found in Canada, the studios, although now it's also in the US and the different parts of Europe. But so we would wake up in the morning and we weren't allowed to talk. And we had silent mornings, and then we would go to the yoga shala there and meditate for half an hour and then start the practice and philosophy classes, anatomy classes. We had guest teachers come in. Yes, teachers from, I remember, from New York and from other places. We had a lot of different teachers.
Wow, sounds like a really full, like a very fully immersed experience.
Yeah, definitely.
And how was being in India for the first time at 19?
I loved being there. What I loved about it was just the whole training itself. And I feel like it was really special and precious to take a month, for anyone to take a month out of their lives to devote themselves to something that's like a higher spiritual calling. And what you feel in a yoga class and that moment of pause or surrender, like this is something that you can feel like all the time. And being in that environment with all these other yogis that are also on the same journey as you, it was like this collective energy that really, I felt like it was very powerful and very, very healing and very precious. I remember like crying tears of gratitude for the first time and just being able to see things from like a different perspective. Just feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for being there. And yeah.
That sounds amazing. I think there is something so special about those kind of immersive experience, teacher training experience, especially in another country, and probably especially in India, where you're fully immersed and you're like, from the moment you wake up till you go to sleep, you're just doing yoga or studying yoga or listening to lectures. And you're also surrounded by other students who's so also dedicated to yoga. And I think there's something so special about that.
Yeah, it is. And I know that with other teacher trainings that are divided and over weekends,
Mm.
it can be more accessible to a lot of students, but I don't think it has the same impact because students have to still very much involved in their daily lives and daily routines and responsibilities of everyday life. And then they would go to the training and then exit it. And so it's like an in and out kind of experience.
Yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
So true. It's a very different experience for sure. And you said that after the 1 month in India and you came back to Canada and
Yeah.
took another year to kind of complete the certification. So what entailed in that 1 year for you to complete the certification process?
So after 1 year of being in Kerala, I got back to Montreal and I was teaching community classes at the yoga studio where introduced me to yoga. So I went back to the same studio. And that was really nice because they already knew me from before. And I was teaching community classes. So that is the classes offered by new teachers to the public, where students just pay $5 to attend the community classes. And it was really nice for me. I was busy that time. I was babysitting in the mornings and then I was serving at a Lebanese restaurant. And in between my lunch and dinner shift at the restaurant, I would teach an hour and a half class. And I was very lucky that the restaurant was just a couple of minutes walking to the yoga studio. So I could leave the restaurant, teach an hour and a half class, and then go back to the restaurant and continue working for the evening and like close it. So I was busy, but I was very happy doing that. And then I ended up moving to Saskatchewan, like a different province in the middle of Canada. And I moved there to pursue a university degree because remember, I said that English literature wasn't what I thought it would be. So I decided to study kinesiology. And I went there because my father was a professor and still is at that same university. And in Montreal, that cégep, those 2 year prep period, I did mine in theater. So in order for me to study kinesiology in Montreal, I needed to have done my cégep degree in science. And I did it in theater, so really unrelated. But in the rest of Canada, you just need a high school degree. You don't need there's no cégep in the rest of Canada. So I was fine to study kinesiology in Regina, Saskatchewan. So yeah, so that's why I ended up moving there. And then I was studying university and also completing the 10-month period of the teacher training. Every month, it was like you had to send a project online and it would be different things. So 1 month, it was to volunteer at some center and to share your experience about it. Another project was to take 6 different styles of yoga and to like report about it. Another month was to do a book report on like a yoga book. So it was very different, all of it. And then you would send it to the coordinator and she would give you feedback. And yeah, and then I completed it in 1 year, flew to Ontario for the graduation ceremony.
Wow, sounds like a really cool 500-hour program, all the project of like reading certain book or taking different styles of yoga. And I love how kind of in-depth and comprehensive that training was. And with that training, are you only allowed to or certified to be able to teach that one style of yoga? Is it a set sequence, or are you also able to kind of teach vinyasa where you can create your own sequence?
So that style of yoga has a set sequence that's similar to Bikram, but a little different. And then I ended up doing a modal flow training, which is more so where there is a vinyasa in between the poses and it's more fluid and less static. But because I feel like the experience I have with teaching yoga is so vast, I feel comfortable to also teach vinyasa classes that are more creative and that it's up to the teacher to create their own sequence.
Mhm.
But the moto sequence doesn't place any restriction on their teachers in that sense. But yes, it is a set sequence.
I see. And it sounded like you were really working the restaurant jobs and then teaching. So you were quite busy trying to still teach yoga, but earning money in restaurant business. So when you went back to school for kinesiology and you graduated from your 500-hour certification, did you start teaching right away as your part-time job?
Yes, so I was actually still teaching yoga in my first year of university. I continued teaching yoga and while at the university and studying my degree. It was a 4-year degree. So I was doing both.
I see. And after you graduated, how did you slowly kind of transition to becoming a full-time teacher?
So I did my field work for university I went back to India and saw that my university in Saskatchewan had a partnership with a university in India. And I always wanted to go back. So I decided to do my field work, like my internship with in India, and I went there and I worked with kids in a rehabilitation center with developmental disabilities. So I did that for 3 months for my internship and then just made the trip a lot longer. And I went to practice with Sharat Joyce in Mysore, India, who's the lineage holder of Ashtanga yoga, and explored Goa a bit and went to Thailand. So I made it like a much longer trip. But yes, I finished my degree with that internship. And then I was still working other jobs while teaching yoga. I didn't go straight into full-time yoga teaching.
I want to hear more about going to Mysore to study with Sharat. So were you already practicing Ashtanga by then?
Yes. So I forgot to mention that when I moved to Saskatchewan from Montreal, there was no hot yoga studio in Regina, the city that I was living in, that I moved to then. It's a much, much smaller city, and there was no hot yoga at the time, and all I knew was hot. And the structure of the sequence and pushing myself to my limits, like really, I was drawn to that. So yeah, I started practicing, and then I went to Mysore in 2014 for the first time. Yes, when I was 25 years old, I went to Mysore and I practiced with Sharad for 1 month.
Wow. How was the application process like to go study at Mysore in 2014? I remember hearing like you have to have like a letter from your Ashtanga teacher and you had to kind of apply and you wait to see if you get accepted. Like how is that how it was or how was it for you?
So right now, you do need a letter if you're a new student. But back then, you just needed to say if you had practiced with an authorized teacher for minimum 3 months. And back then, the the server didn't have enough bandwidth to accept all the applications coming in at the same time. You needed to apply 3 months before it's midnight time in India. So whatever time zone you're in, like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., you needed to apply and click the submit button when the clock strikes 12 midnight in
Wow.
India. And what happened, Reika, is that the server would crash. I got lucky that time that it was okay. And I got in, but there were so many other times that I applied and the server would crash. And I remember maybe a year or two later where just being there for 6 hours in front of the laptop, just clicking submit and you just had to wait until person on the other end like fix the server. Now it's different though. So
Wow. I want to know, how was your first Mysore, going to Mysore experience, and also how often do you go back now to practice with Shraddha?
So my first time in Mysore was amazing. Before going there, I was working at the rehabilitation center in a very small and remote village. It was a charity-run organization that was very far from any city. It was about 2 hours from Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu would be like the closest city. But I ended up getting quite sick, which I know happens for a lot of foreigners. But it really took a toll on my experience there. I wasn't actually able to work the hours required. And I fainted in a mall, and I had to spend 8 days in the hospital, and I got bronchitis, and I developed a throat infection, and I was constantly getting these very high fevers. So I would go into work, and then my boss would just be like, "Hey, just go rest," kind of thing. And so that was kind of my experience for the 3 months of me doing my internship. I was very unwell. And I was scared about going to Mysore because I couldn't like go up a flight of stairs. And then I was like, how am I going to practice Ashtanga with Sharat if I can't walk properly because I felt so sick?
Mhm.
And I was just out of energy. So I felt quite anxious about that. And but I don't know. I ended up getting better. And I took a bus from my internship place to get to Mysore. And I ended up feeling better. And I made a friend on the first day from Australia and Lebanon, Australia. And then just ended up meeting more and more people. And Mysore is amazing because it's like a small little Ashtanga bubble. So it's just kind of like a whole culture when you go there and you practice and you go for brunch. And then it's up to you if you want to go deeper and study philosophy or Sanskrit or anything else or chanting, or you could just like not and do whatever you want. But there's that option there.
Wow. And how many people were you practicing with in the Shala back in 2014?
Yeah, so back then it was like a shala that's not the new shala of where it is now. So back then the shala was in Gokulam still, and our mats were very, very, very tight, just a couple centimeters in between mats. And I would say maybe you can fit like 100 students in the room, but sometimes you would be when we finished back bends, you had to take your mat and then you had to finish the closing series in the change room. So you're closing in the change room, like doing shoulder stand, headstand, and all of that, while people are like trying to change and influx of students coming in and out. And so it was just different.
Yeah, wow. I know that their new Shala it's almost look like a big gymnasium and can fit
Yes.
with the people.
Yeah, that's it. It's much more spacious, that's for sure.
Yeah. And are you going back once a year or every few years still to this day to Mysore?
So I've been 3 times. I went in 2014, 2016, and then I let an 8 year hiatus go by, and then I didn't go until this past winter. So this past December 2023, January 2024 is when I went. And I got to practice in the new shala, and that was amazing because it was like I just saw everyone from 8 years ago, from 10 years ago, and it felt so nice.
Yeah, I'm sure it was probably really nice to go back. Did you feel like the energy was still the same, or was it different since the space has changed?
Uh, it's a little different, but it's a little different, but not in like a bad way. It's also nice to have space when you're practicing and you're not like toppling over some other student. And so the space itself was nice. And there's a lot more restaurants and like vegan food and things like that for tourists and for the Ashtanga students. So a lot more things catered for Ashtanga students.
Mm-hmm. Sounds amazing. So maybe tell me what happened. First, you went to India for the internship, and you also went to Mysore. And I know you said you traveled a bit in Thailand. And
So that was my second time to India, though.
Oh yeah, second time. Yeah, because the first time was your 200-hour.
500-hour, but 500.
Yes. Sorry. And did you go back to Canada, Montreal after that? And did you start working as a yoga teacher?
Yes. So after my internship, I did my degree in kinesiology in Saskatchewan, so right in the middle of Canada, and so I had already left Montreal at that point to study my degree, and I went back and I was also teaching. I was teaching yoga, and I was also working like as an exercise therapist at a rehabilitation center with a client with Parkinson's. So I was doing that for some time in addition to teaching yoga. So I would combine both. I also was assisting or leading the classes in the Mysore room. So we had like a morning Mysore program and an evening Mysore program. And the teachers, we just rotated and did different days of the week. I started teaching lead primary once a week on Saturdays. And I always combined it with something else. I was also serving at some point as well at a restaurant right before doing my second trip with Sharat. Then I went again in 2016, but I went this time for 3 months, which is really nice. Yeah. Back then, you could choose to go for 3 months at a time.
Uh-huh. Wow. And was your desire to become authorized Ashtanga teacher?
No, it wasn't. And I'm actually still not authorized. So I haven't, yes, maybe next trip if I go, maybe.
And after going to Mysore for the second time, and first of all, I like how you said you were doing kinesiology, therapeutic work, working at the rehab center and teaching yoga. I feel like you must learn so much about body and how that would probably, I can imagine, translate so well to refining your teaching as a yoga teacher too.
Yeah. And I would say a lot of it too, though, was just the interpersonal skills of dealing with people as well, and of kind of like the practice using like compassion and just meeting people where they're at. I felt like the practice developed that in me, like in a stronger sense, and dealing with people of all levels, all ages, capabilities. I feel like the practice did that as well, or facilitated that for me.
Yeah. And what was your family and friends react to you really pursuing yoga and being really dedicated to yoga? Were they supportive, or were they surprised, or did they want you to kind of quote unquote get a real job?
So my mom was quite supportive from the beginning. And she started coming to my classes actually as soon as I started teaching. She would just support me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that was really nice. And my father was more skeptical about it just because he's a professor and he has a different mindset. Yes, so he was more skeptical about it and about me being able to make a living only teaching yoga. And I mean, I actually studied university because he said that I should get a degree, and just have a backup plan in case this was a phase that I found myself in at 18 years old, and then I might not want to teach yoga anymore. So yeah, but no, there everyone in my environment is quite supportive of it. And then the more I teach and travel, you meet more like-minded people, like I'm sure you have as well. So,
Yeah, definitely. And I guess this kind of brings you kind of close to when the pandemic hit. Well, how was your teaching life like before and then during the pandemic? And also, how has it changed since the pandemic?
okay, so I became a full-time yoga teacher. I was working at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. I did that. It was a desk job and an admin job, and I did that for a year and a half. And I was working different units, and then I ended up working in HR and human resources. I was hiring people, interviewing people, being in charge of their pay and all of this. But I was in front of a computer for 40 hours a week. And even though the salary was good with good pension and benefits, I felt like my soul was dying. And I was just affected by that work. I loved the people and my coworkers, but after the work, I would sometimes teach a class at the university, or I would find myself like not wanting to teach or being too tired to teach or not want to wake up the next morning to do a practice. Um, so I felt like my practice was very much affected and my teaching yoga was being affected. And this job, I felt very replaceable. I felt like what I was doing was not fulfilling and anyone could just do this job of HR. So yes, so when I quit the job and then I decided to go and just teach yoga full time. And this was in 2018. And it was nice because I just contacted a studio back then. So I was working Reika at a studio for 9 years, but it wasn't a good fit at the end of the 9 years.
Mhm.
And then it was both a decision for the owner to not want me to be there and for myself to not want to be there either. So then I was still working the RCMP job at the same time that I was no longer at that yoga studio. And then when I quit the RCMP job, I decided to just dedicate myself to teaching yoga. And at this new studio, then I was able to teach as many classes as I wanted and whatever style I wanted. And then they asked me if I wanted to start teaching workshops and teacher trainings. And by then, I had about 10 years of teaching experience. So I felt very capable and competent to do that. But that wasn't something that I had ever done before at the other studio that I was in. It was just this new studio that offered me these things. And I was kind of surprised. I didn't even ask them to do that. So yeah, I think sometimes your environment is very important and who you work for them to like bring out sides of you that you didn't know.
Yeah, so true. And sometimes I feel like maybe I feel like I'm not ready yet, but then somebody can see it in you that like, yes, you are ready. Like do these things. And sometimes you need that little extra push to be like, all right, I can do it.
Definitely, yes. And then it's so nice when other people can see that in you too. It makes you believe in yourself more.
Yeah. So you started teaching teacher training and workshop at this new studio?
Yes, in addition to Ashtanga classes, like modified Ashtanga. And then when I had some Ashtanga students that would come in on a regular basis, then I started to teach full primary classes, half primary at first, just half the sequence with the traditional Sanskrit count, and then full primary classes. And I learned how to teach full primary because David Robson from Toronto, he came to the yoga studio I was in before, and he taught us a 100-hour Ashtanga immersion where he taught us how to teach the full primary sequence with the count.
Oh.
Um, yeah, so this was back in 2014. And yes, and then I was able to like add that as well to my teaching.
And where the city that you lived in at this time, was Ashtanga very popular, or did you have a skill set that was kind of a specialty? Not many other teachers knew how to lead a primary or, had a strong Ashtanga practice that they could lead a primary or a Mysore room.
Yeah, so in Regina, the city there where I found Ashtanga, I would say that was maybe the only studio that was offering Ashtanga yoga where I worked at for 9 years. And then when I left that studio, then I started to teach Ashtanga yoga, but there wasn't other studios really offering Ashtanga yoga. And I already had the experience of teaching in the Mysore room and having Mysore style practice and having gone to India as well with Sharat. So that also helped.
Yeah. And I wonder, when you moved from the studio that you were working for 9 years to this new studio, did a lot of your Ashtanga students followed you to the new studio?
A few, I wouldn't say a lot, but like maybe a handful. Yes.
Uh-huh.
A few did actually, and just showed up and surprised me and were like, oh, well, there's Ashtanga here. And, so that was also really nice. And you spoke about the pandemic as well. So when the pandemic hit, the studio closed for a few months, but that allowed me to teach yoga online. So so that was nice. I was teaching through the yoga studio, also Ashtanga classes, yin classes, things like this. But I was also teaching my own classes because I was teaching for at the university for maybe a decade. And then those students at the university didn't have access to any recreational classes. So staff at the university, professors, students at the university, they had no access to any fitness classes, and yoga was one of them. So I reached out to all my students and I asked them, like, do you guys want to do yoga with me on Zoom? And yeah, and I had a group and I did it for about a year and a half. These 3 times a week. It was yoga 3 times a week. And yeah, and that was really good. And then I started to travel internationally during the pandemic itself in 2021. I started to travel for the first time and teach yoga. And I went to Curaçao, which is a little island on top of Venezuela. And I taught yoga there for 3 months. And I was still teaching my Zoom classes to my clients from back home. So it allowed me to like keep teaching no matter where I was in the world.
I love hearing that. So I have a few questions, follow-up questions from that. When you started teaching Zoom classes for yourself, not for the studio, and you said you reached out to your students to see if they wanted yoga, were you already collecting your students' email addresses before the pandemic?
I knew a little bit what their emails were through like other mass emails from the university and things of this nature. And then I contacted some of my students were professors or faculty members, and they knew the students from the university classes themselves, and they helped me out with like also getting the emails. Yes. So I did that. I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing anything that would be a conflict of interest. So I wasn't getting students from the yoga studio where I was working at, where I was still employed. Like I very much did this away from anything that would be a conflict of interest to someone else like hiring me. So
Mhm. Yeah. I think
yeah.
great that you started teaching online during the pandemic and you continue that for a year and a half. And even when you went to go traveling and start teaching abroad. So that brings me to the question of how did you find that teaching position internationally, the first job?
So I found it through Yoga Trade, and which I know that you know of as well, Reka.
Mhm.
And I've been wanting to teach yoga internationally since I was 25, I would say. When I went to Mysore and practiced with Sharat, I met someone who was traveling the world just through work away. So she wasn't teaching yoga, but she was just traveling the world at that point for 10 months just through work away. And I got really inspired by her. And I was like, wow, I want to do the same thing, but teach yoga.
Mhm.
So this is something that I had in my mind and wanted to do for years. It wasn't just something that was a spur of the moment overnight thing. It was like a deep, deep, deep within me.
Mhm.
And I actually felt very restless. I felt like I was in a rut and I felt like I was in my wrong environment. And I felt like I really wanted to leave the city. It was a very, very small city where I was in. And growing up in Montreal, which is the second largest city in Canada, it was a very big shift for me to move to a very small city in Canada. Yeah, so I felt like it was my time to leave. I had already graduated university and I felt like I needed to teach internationally. So I applied through Yoga Trade and I found a job in Curacao. And I've always been attracted to islands and to tropical weather and climate. And yes, and that position, I was living in a house and I had roommates and they provided me with the accommodation and a car. And I was teaching yoga at two different studios in that island in Curacao. And I was able to do that and also teach online as well, my own classes.
That sounds amazing. And how many classes a week do you think you were teaching in person there for those two different studios? And I guess also with your online too, you were teaching 3 classes a week on top of that online, right?
Yes, that's right. And I believe I was teaching about 8 to 10 in the studio, in both studios, and then 3 a week. Yeah, that's right. And I also got online through Yoga Academy International. I applied to teach with their platform. So then I was also teaching once a week through them as well.
Ah, that sounds amazing. And was this the studio job you found on Yoga Trade? Were they paid teaching position? Because I know that.
Yes. Yes, they were all paid positions, the jobs that I had, just because at that point I had been teaching yoga for more than 10 years. So I wasn't going to accept anything that was not paid. I think it's okay for teachers who want to gain the experience and maybe they're newer teachers, or if it feels right for them to do an exchange, then I think that's okay too.
Yeah, but definitely I agree with you that, you have so much experience and trainings under your belt that I really believe in yoga teachers deserve to get paid.
Definitely, yes.
So, okay, so how long were you there and then where did you go next?
I was in Curacao for 3 months and then I went to Aruba and went there because it's just another island. It's known as the ABCs, Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire. They're all Dutch islands. And Aruba was just a 30-minute flight from Curacao. So I went there, but not to teach yoga, just to reconnect with a boyfriend that I was with at the time. He flew there from Canada to see me. And then my best friend at the time flew from Canada also to see me in Aruba. So that was nice. And then after that, Reka, I applied to study with Sharat and I got accepted, but I still felt like with the whole COVID, it was very challenging to fly to India and to get all these tests done. And if you have a layover in Europe, there was just a lot of logistics to be able to like land in India.
Yeah.
And I felt like I wanted to study something deeper because when you practice with Sharat, it's amazing, but it's just asana, just the physical practice. And then I was doing online Mysore classes with Tim Feldman from Miami. Just a week of Mysore online when I was practicing with Kudas in Curaçao. So right before leaving to Aruba, okay?
Mhm.
And was offering a 300-hour teacher training in Miami, him and Kino, his wife. And and I really felt like I wanted to do that instead of go to India to practice with Sharat. Like I felt like I would rather do a 300-hour, 2-month Ashtanga training.
Mhm.
So I asked him if I could, and they had a scholarship option, and I got it. So I decided, and it all aligned perfectly because I was in Curaçao 3 months, and then Aruba 1 month, and right after my time in Aruba was done, it was like I could go to Miami, and I have 5 cousins that live there.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was able to stay. Yeah, I was able to stay with one of my cousins and her family and her kids. And it was just a few minutes drive from the yoga shala. Which I felt was very lucky because Miami can be big, and to have it so close to the yoga studio, like I could honestly walk there maybe for more than half hour. So it wasn't even that far away.
That sounds amazing. So it seems like everything kind of lined up so well for you timing wise too.
Yes, definitely. So I feel like that was maybe a 6-month trip, and I did the 300-hour training with Kino and Tim, and that was really great. We were doing Mysore in the mornings, and then just philosophy and learning how to adjust and teachings on the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita and trauma informed yoga and yoga for social justice and learning the Sanskrit count. I already learned that through David Robson many years ago, but we had to learn that anyways, and just practicing how to teach. And yeah, a lot of it was a refresher for me, but I was still very grateful to be there as well. We had 15 students from all over the world, which I wasn't expecting. I thought most students would be from the States, but a lot were from Europe and Asia and South America. So just all over.
Wow. And that was, you said 1 month, or how many months was that? 3 months?
It was a 300-hour teacher training that went over 7 weeks, so almost 2 months. And
Okay.
this was in 2022.
Ah, wow. Okay. And then what happened? I'm like so curious to know your journey. And then where to next?
So after that, I was away. That was a 6-month trip. And then I came back to Canada, and I just continued teaching, continued my life there. I was teaching at that point, maybe at 2 different studios. I was teaching at a private high school to teenagers, teaching at the university. And I was also tutoring Spanish, just over the phone to professors who just needed conversational Spanish for their research or whatever. So just doing all of that.
Oh, at what point did you stop teaching the online classes?
You know what? I stopped teaching when I stopped teaching the online classes when I was in Miami doing the 300-hour because it was a 6-day a week training that started at 7:30, sometimes with pranayama classes, or 8 a.m. with Mysore classes, and the days would end at dinner time. And this was my life for 7 weeks. So I stopped the classes then, and I just told my students I can't.
But then you said you went back to Canada, you started teaching at a university again. So were you able to see your students in person?
Yes, I was.
Uh-huh.
And then I decided to leave Canada 17 months ago and to just travel and teach for good and not go back to Canada. So that's what I did in April of 2023, I guess.
Where was the first location you went to after that?
So I went to Peru, but that had to teach at Moksha Yoga Amazonica in Moyobamba, where you were just teaching at.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I went there, but that was my second time there. The first time I was there in 2022, maybe. So that was my second time there, and I taught 4 trainings there. And then I went to Nicaragua to teach for 10 days at Amaru, which is like a surf place resort. And then I went to Morocco and I was teaching yoga for 2 months at a surf camp. And that was amazing because I got to meet students from all over Europe, the people that would come there and stay for a week or 2 weeks at the surf camp. And then I went to Thailand. I found a job in Thailand teaching teacher trainings, and I always felt like very drawn to go to Asia. So I felt like this was perfect. And I went there and I started teaching teacher trainings, and then I taught also a 300-hour teacher training. And then I went to India, and that's when I went to practice with Sharat after an 8-year hiatus of not having been to India. And the dates aligned very perfectly, I felt, with everything. So I was with Sharat 2 months, and then I went to Kerala and I did a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat in Kerala. And that was my second time doing this Vipassana. And then I decided to go to Bali just to practice here Ashtanga for 2 weeks. And then I went back to Thailand to do a teacher training. And then, you know what? I was supposed to be a permanent lead teacher at this school in Thailand. And that was what I thought would happen, was to teach teacher trainings every 2 months. Teach for 4 weeks, have a month off. Teach 4 weeks, have a month off. And that was perfect for me because I told myself I could travel in between the teacher trainings and see more of Asia. But then, unfortunately, because I was working without a work permit, I got arrested in Thailand. And then I wasn't able to, it was better for me not to continue
Oh
these teacher trainings.
At least,
Yes.
yeah, that's so, but isn't it kind of isn't it the fault of the studio who hired you?
Well, yes, I mean, we had to go to court for this and everything, and I had to testify guilty in front of a judge, and we went to another island and took a boat there, and yes,
Wow.
but basically it was better now, though it's proper, and they're only hiring teachers with work permits. Yes, so now it's different, but. Yes, it's very common though for them not to have work permits.
Yeah.
Some countries are just stricter than other countries. So
I actually have heard that Thailand is a little bit more strict with hiring or the foreigners who can work in Thailand.
yeah, that's it. So then what happened is that I told myself I was in between teacher trainings in Thailand, and I decided to come to Bali just in between teacher trainings, thinking I would go back to Koh Phangan, Thailand, and continue teaching the teacher trainings. And then during my layover during my layover on my way to Bali, I was told like it would be better not to return. So I was just in this position, like in the airport, being like, what do I do now? Like, I thought I had this permanent job of being a lead teacher, and like now what do I do?
Yeah.
So yeah, so then I thought I would be in Bali for 2 weeks for vacation, but I stayed for 2 months, and then I just kept applying for jobs, and I found a job in Sri Lanka. So I was just there for 2 months in Sri Lanka, teaching and also leading a retreat. Yes, and then finally, I just got a little bit tired, Reka, of all this traveling. Like I've been traveling out of a carry-on suitcase for 17 months, and I feel like I just wanted to settle down and have my own place and build community and have a life outside of teaching yoga. Yeah, like I'm always living wherever I'm teaching, and I just wanted to have my own place. I wanted to cook my own meals, which I haven't had the chance to do in 17 months, and just kind of like go out with friends and go for dinners and just be like, yeah, let's do this on the weekend, which is like different when you're constantly traveling. And yeah, and just saying always like, oh, I'm leaving in 2 weeks to everyone, and it's
Yeah.
different.
No, I can totally understand that feeling of wanting to ground and settle down in one spot after traveling for many months or years. So I totally understand that. But I also want to say I applaud you for you're traveling with a carry-on suitcase. So you're really not packing heavy. You're trying to keep everything light.
Yeah, and I think what's been helpful is that I'm always in warm climates. So I mean I don't even have a pair of jeans with me. I have like 5 leggings and just a shorts, and one pair of running shoes and one pair of sandals, and just tank tops. And like if I was traveling to different countries, like in Europe where there's a winter, or then it would be difficult, I would say, where you need to pack heavier clothes. But yeah, I was fortunate to just be in very warm climates that don't require much. The only thing was I was a bit challenging was that I was in India for 2.5 months, and even though it's warm there, you need to cover up. So there, it was, yes, I needed to cover up and I could not be wearing shorts or tank tops or anything like this. But yeah.
I love that. Well, I have a lot of follow-up questions about it's so amazing to hear all the journeys of places you've gone and taught, studios and teacher training and 300-hour teacher training, and also, unfortunate situation that happened to you in Thailand. But I'm curious, were you applying and finding job throughout the whole experience on Yoga Trade, or was
Yes.
it other form, or maybe connections or networking that also allowed you to find opportunities?
So when I was in Bali for 2 months, when I thought I would stay for 2 weeks, I was trying to see where I could teach in Bali, but it's also in the same position like Thailand where you need a work permit. And at that point, at that point in my mind, I wasn't thinking to myself, I want to settle down in Bali. I was still thinking, like, where else do I teach? Where else do I go? But I'm just now in Bali and things have changed and I'm not going back to Thailand and just trying to figure it out. And I applied, yeah, through Yoga Trade, and I found a job in Sri Lanka. And it was perfect because when my visa in Bali ended, that job there would have started. So I feel like I've been very blessed with the sense of timing and how things have like unfolded as well with that.
Yeah. And another question I have is because you are experienced teacher and you are taking job that's actually pays, because on Yoga Trade website, I've noticed there's a lot of trade position and you have to kind of look really hard and consistently to find a well-paid position as a yoga teacher on that website. Have you found it traveling and teaching through finding a job on Yoga Trade? Have you found it that you are able to actually make enough to save, even with flights that you have to buy from the next job to the next? Or do you find it's kind of like, well, it's enough to get by, like live? yeah, so I'm curious about the financial situation. Like, how is it possible to be a traveling teacher and financially do well that you could actually make and save quite a bit of money?
When teaching teacher trainings, I feel like it is possible because the salary is much better than teaching at dropping classes to tourists that come. Um, Yes, and then all the places that you teach at, they provide you accommodation, all meals, and salary, but the teacher trainings is a much bigger salary for
Mhm.
sure. So I think it just depends if you're able to teach teacher trainings. And each training, each school pays differently. It's not like all schools pay the same. So some schools, like the one in Thailand, already would pay for the amount of students that would come. So if it was 0 to 9, it was one salary, and 10 to 15, a different, and more than 15 students, different. So that's also nice too.
Yeah, that's so amazing to hear that. I love hearing your journey of, because I always wondered, is it really possible to travel and teach yoga but can still earn enough money to live comfortably? I know that living comfortably is different amount for everybody, but ideally I don't want to go into my savings as I'm teaching and traveling. I want to still be making money, or being able to save money as I'm working. So it's so nice to hear that it is possible, and it seems like you're doing it.
Yeah, it always helps to have those some savings as well, especially for unpredictable situations which happen all the time, like being caught there and being told not to return to Thailand. So then I was in a position where I was searching for work for 2 months. Yeah, it definitely helps to have something though.
Mhm. Yeah. But it seems like you are still able to work and travel, but also I know you invest a lot on your own education and trainings as a yoga teacher, which I think is so important. Going to Mysore, you went to Miami for that training. So I feel like those kind of, I guess when I'm thinking about, I would love to be a traveling yoga teacher. I also want to make sure I be able to continue to invest in my training as I'm teaching and traveling. So it's nice to see that it is possible. Hearing your stories. And now that you're in Bali, you said you're gonna start teaching at a studio that's opening up in Bali. And where in Bali are you?
I'm in Ubud here and I'm in the center. And I'm very happy that I found a really sweet apartment that is just a few minutes walking from where I practice Mysore every morning. And I found this place just a couple of days before flying here, actually. So I felt like it was also very aligned.
Oh,
And I found the contract with this yoga studio that's opening up next month also before coming here when I was in Sri Lanka. I had a call with the owner and already set up a meeting to meet with him when I arrived. So I met up with him the day after I landed here and just got the ball rolling, really. Yes, and his studio should open up in first week of October. So that's coming up in less than a month. And I am planning to teach Mysore style classes, like evening Mysore program, because I know that they don't have that here. From what I've seen, it's all morning Mysore. And I also want to practice in the mornings too. So I don't want to be teaching instead of practicing. Yeah, and then I there's a potential for me to also be leading teacher trainings in this studio as well. Um, and we're going to be a group of other teachers. Maybe there's 7 other teachers, I believe. So I'm looking forward to it because it's also like a blank slate in the sense that it hasn't been built yet, and I can very much help create this community and be teaching Mysore, which is like an extension of myself, instead of simply having to insert myself into classes that are like, this is what we need. Can you teach this? Which has been a lot of my experience throughout the years.
Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity, and you got the ball rolling right away. And I'm curious, with in Bali, what is the situation for a foreigner to be able to work there and teach yoga there? Is there a specific kind of visa you need to apply, or does your yoga
Yes.
studio have to sponsor you?
Yes, and that's good that you brought that up because I was going to say that. So, the you need to have an employer to carry out the legal documents to give you a work visa. Some of them sponsor you, some of them don't, and it is good for 1 year. So this new studio owner that I will be teaching with starting next month, um, I will be able to get a work permit through him, which is very good for me. And I already had that set up before coming here. So yes, it's good. And we could negotiate like the terms of the contract for me to be able to teach in other places as well. And while the studio is still building up.
And that's amazing that you were able to find the studio that can help you with the visa process.
Yes, yes.
Oh, and it's so amazing. I mean, it sounds like a dream to be able to live in Bali and teach yoga there.
You know what, Reika? Sometimes I was in position just because of this where I was like, this seems too good to be true, but I told myself like it's not, like you can have what you want, and we really need to allow ourselves to have that. And there were so many situations with other apartments that weren't lining up for me, they just weren't happening so many other places. um, like situations where I would be sending the deposit to secure an apartment. And while it was happening, the owner said, "Oh, sorry, someone else just paid me. The flat isn't available anymore."
Oh,
Or I tried another apartment and she was like, "Just so you know, we're starting construction. Are you okay with the construction for a month in the place?" Or like just things like that that I kept being like, what is going on? And
mhm.
then when I found this place just a few days before my flight, it was more than what I could have imagined, in the sense that all my criteria for an apartment was met. And then I don't know, I feel like we just have to learn how to trust and to really surrender to things happening for our greater good.
Yeah. And how were you searching for a place to stay before you even got to Bali?
Oh, just through the Facebook groups online through Facebook. There's so many community pages of people living in Bali, jobs here in Bali, yoga jobs online outside of Bali. So really just online, actually. Yeah, so I was pretty constant. I was pretty on it. Like I was very invested in finding a place and in finding a job. And yeah.
Yeah. And the yoga teaching position you found through Yoga Trade, or was it through the Facebook?
It was through Facebook, and he just needed teachers to teach with him. So we had a call immediately, and then and he was like, "Yeah, perfect. Meet me when you're in Bali." And I met up with him the day after I landed and saw the place, and it's a beautiful space that's very big. There's also going to be an Indian restaurant right then, and they're like glued to it, a smoothie and juice bar, and it's in out a little bit outside the center, so it's quite, there's a lot of greenery around it. And I'm planning to also teach teacher trainings there. He provides teacher trainings every 2 months in a different location, so I could start doing that. It's starting the winter time, and then I'd like to give my own retreats there as well, especially since it will have a kitchen and a restaurant. Like I envision it being like doing a lot of things there. And what's great is that he's very open to teachers teaching whatever it is that they want, like workshops or anything. He also wants to do things with kids in that space. So it's very open.
Wow, I love that. I love hearing your journey and your story. So maybe would you like to give some kind of tips or advice for yoga teachers listening who want to also travel and teach? Since you have been doing this for a while, maybe give us some tips. What has worked for you? What has been a challenge for you, or anything you learned along the way in this journey of being a traveling yoga teacher?
Yes, I think the biggest thing is to just, if you feel like that's something that you want to do, to do it. And I had students before ask me, like, if I've had, like, many of the jobs I had, I didn't know exactly, like, I didn't have pictures, or I didn't know exactly very detailed of where I would be or this or that. And I had students ask me, like, oh, but did you know this and this and this and that? And I was like, no, but none of that matters. So I think that as soon as people are just open to going there, and you know, like, the details of what you're going to be doing, and you know the contract, but then the format and it needs to be loose, it needs to be open, and you just have to be okay with going somewhere that's unknown, and connecting with a new culture, and just having that, like, not to have any expectations in that sense. I think that's very important. But basically, just to go for it if it's something that you want to do.
Yeah, I love that. And definitely being, I think, adaptable, open, and flexible is so important as I'm sure as a traveling yoga teacher, but just traveling in general, right? Like you just have to be open-minded.
Definitely, yes. You got to learn to surrender and to just be present moment to moment, and it gives you a deeper awareness of, like, what is going on, because everything, I think, is new, and novelty is all the time. And yeah, it just makes you be present more and to really appreciate your surroundings and your environment more, I have found.
Yeah. And since you have taught at so many different countries and places, how did you know it was time for you to leave and go seek a next position? Or were you kind of always searching for the next position? And if you found something better than whatever the situation you are at the moment, you kind of take off to the new spot? Like, how did you know when to leave?
So I think that's a good question. So basically, when I left Canada, I knew that I wanted to travel and teach internationally. And every job I had, I knew the amount, the contract, the length, and where I would go after, usually as well. Like, I always had somewhere I was going after. And then, but what made me transition from to wanting to continue traveling to not want to continue traveling was that it didn't feel the same anymore. And I felt like what I was longing for inside changed for me. And I remember telling a friend of mine when she asked me, initially, I wasn't going to settle down in Bali, Rekha. I was supposed to go to Sri Lanka after this for 2 months, but I actually turned down the contract because I said enough is enough. So, but I had a friend of mine, and she asked me my plans, and I was like, oh, I'm in Sri Lanka for 2 months. I'm going to Bali for a month, and I'm going to Sri Lanka for 2 months, and then I'm going to go here. And she was like, wow, that's so awesome. Like, that's so exciting. So many plans. And in my head, I was like, no, it's not exciting. And this is my norm. And I didn't feel like her enthusiasm and what she thought of my plans. To me, it didn't feel that way. To me, what felt exciting and novel was actually not going to a new country, was not buying another flight, was not having a new teaching experience. It was settling down and building community and having my own place. So I felt that inside, and I just didn't want to continue searching for jobs. And being in tune, I think, with your intuition is very important. And I feel like the practice gives us that ability to listen within, to feel if something feels expansive or contracting, and to keep listening to those inner urges. And just also to like notice synchronicities of the world around you and people that come into your life, and signs. I'm very open to receiving signs of the universe as well as listening within. And for me, it felt like I just didn't want to even continue traveling. And also there comes a point, Reika, too, where you accumulate experience, and then it's like, okay, for what? So there comes a point where it's like, okay, you accumulate, and then it is to be of service, to share, to bring it into the world in a new way. So for me, I feel like I'm at that point right now where traveling gives me that experience. And yes, I'm sharing when I'm teaching yoga, but it's different now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was very beautiful to hear. I guess you kind of shared it, but maybe I'll ask again. What aspects of being a traveling yoga teacher do you like? Well, I guess you're trying to kind of stop being a traveling yoga teacher. You kind of want to settle in one spot.
Yeah, but what I liked about it was just being able to go to many different countries, whatever country that I found interesting, just to travel, meet new people, make connections. And I would say that has been the biggest thing that I've enjoyed, was meeting other yoga teachers that I still keep in contact to this day, like other teachers while teaching teacher trainings, like the connection you made with Alina. That's very special. And for us to be able to support each other, and even leading teacher trainings, I say, is very special, because you get to work with students and even watch them on their teaching journey when they graduate a training with you, and still you stay in contact with them, or I try to support them in the best way possible. And when there is no teacher trainings, you can still have an impact in students. Like a lot of the times I was teaching drop-in classes, but many times it was a student's first time, sometimes to yoga, which I think is so precious, or even first time to Ashtanga yoga. And they're like, oh, like, do you know where I could practice in my city? And then I research, and then I find something for them. And so you're giving them that seed to continue this practice. So I think it's really valuable what we're bringing to the world.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you find it was most challenging for you to be a traveling yoga teacher?
I would say it would just be the fact of, you know what, I found it very challenging to continue to keep up my 6 day a week Ashtanga practice, which I've had that practice, this 6 day a week practice, since I'm for 13 years at this point. Like, I've been practicing Mysore style Ashtanga. And when I've been traveling now, and I've been wanting to attend the classes that the students are doing in the teacher trainings, or I'm teaching a morning class, or I'm attending other teachers' classes, so that I get to experience the training from a student's perspective, and then have better things to bring into the training for them. So for me, that was more important than keeping up with my Ashtanga practice outside of the training. So I felt like that was hard for me, is to lose that consistency of the Ashtanga practice that I felt very much grounded me. And I think it's just like I enjoy having routine. So not having that routine and just adapting all the time, being in a new environment, the jet lag, the tiredness, things like that, I would say is the most challenging.
Yeah. And so amazing that you've been practicing consistently for, I think you said 13 years. So, so much admiration for you there. I think that's so amazing how dedicated and committed you are to the practice.
Thank you. It's been Mysore for 13 years, but yoga for 17 years.
Wow. I think that's a, for listeners listening, I think that's already such a great tip, just to be consistent with your own practice as a yoga teacher. I think it's so important. So, so much respect for you for keeping that, consistent practice. I think it's so amazing.
Thank you. And then I would say too to people, if sometimes as an Ashtangi, you can get into the practice and everything is like a honeymoon phase at the beginning where you think it's so amazing and you improve so much in such a short amount of time. And then it's a little bit like, oh, it changes your relationship with the practice. And then you're like, I don't know if I really want to do this, or I don't have an hour and a half every day to do it. And I think it's really important for students to just give themselves more grace and to not feel like they need to do a full series or an hour practice, but just to get on the mat and do sun salutations and just to commit to very small things. And you'll see that the body wants to keep going, or maybe it doesn't, and that's still okay, but you still got on your mat. So sometimes the consistency can seem the motivation can seem a little like daunting, or people might think that Ashtanga is too strict or rigid. But I think you always have a way to adapt the sequence, even if you're injured or you're tired or you have too many commitments in that day. I tell people the practice is meant to help you serve better in your day-to-day life and not to hinder you or to limit what you do with your life and the people around you. So just making the practice fit you for that.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think that's so helpful because I practice Ashtanga for a short period of time, but I almost wish someone has told me that early on in my practice, whether you're Ashtanga practitioner or not. I think that's such a great advice for anybody listening to kind of continue. You can make the practice fit your need and what's going on in your life, and detaching from the expectation of you have to have this solid hour and a half practice every day, giving yourself grace. So that's such a great tip. So thank you for that.
For sure, yes. And I feel too, just to add on, is that I felt like I experienced this myself, and I felt very like I would go through periods of feeling a lot of guilt if I didn't do a full practice or if I skipped practice or things like this. And you don't want to add that on to yourself. Like it's not something that should be something that you should be punishing yourself for. And yoga is about freedom. And yeah. And so as soon as you take that away, it's like you want to practice and to feel good about doing anything that you can on your mat. So yeah, I think it's just important because a lot of students can go through that.
Yeah. So such a great advice. And I have two more questions for you. What does success mean to you as someone who is who's living this yoga teacher path, yoga practitioner and yoga teacher path?
I think success to me is when I am living a life of integrity and when my thoughts, words, and actions are all aligned. I feel like if they're not, I can sense it within myself, like that there is something insincere about the way I'm living or the way that I'm projecting myself in the world. So I think it's very important to live a life for me that's authentic, that's real, and just doing everything possible to stay in alignment and then to share that with others. And I feel like living the eight the 8-limbed path as best as possible, just starting with the yamas and the niyamas is like a blueprint for how to live my life and like external ways of living, internal practices. Um, yeah, and just really being available and present and receptive to people. And I feel like the practice is something that is meant to help alleviate suffering, and it's a form of healing and therapy. And all of us are suffering to some degree, even if they are not in an existential crisis. So just meeting people where they're at and trying to come from a place of compassion and love at all times. And I think it will surprise people like how much that can do for someone else if you just do that for others, if you listen, if you're present with them, and you just try to help.
Thank you. I love that. And I know you shared a little bit already what you kind of have envisioned for future at this new studio you're going to be working at, but I want to know, where do you see your yoga teaching path, your journey, your life going in the future? If you have any particular training you want to teach, or a country that you want to live, or kind of do you see yourself living in Bali for a while? So where do you see yourself in the future?
Well, I this is my fourth time here in Bali, and I arrived here, like I said, a week ago. So I'm very happy to be here right now, um, in my new apartment with this yoga studio that will just open up in a few weeks, and settle in and create this Mysore program, teach teacher trainings. I would like to in the future give my own teacher trainings. I have friends who also want to just collaborate with me in that way, and like for two of us to give our own teacher training, like outside of any yoga studio, just our own. I think that would be amazing. Yeah. So maybe teacher trainings here in Bali.
That sounds really exciting. And now that I know you live in Bali, I've been wanting to go back. So if and when I do go back to visit, I'll definitely come visit you in your Mysore room.
Yeah, you should come. We'll go grab coffee.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my God, I would love that. And is there anything else that I missed, or any question that I didn't ask, but something that you still want to share with the listener before I ask how they can find you?
I feel like this was very thorough and in depth, and you asked a lot of good questions, Reka.
Well, your story, your life is very interesting. So I think anyone listening to this would really appreciate hearing your story, and also maybe it'll inspire some people to believe that they can also do this, travel and teach. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey, your story of teaching yoga, and your passion and dedication for yoga was really felt when I was listening to you speak. So tell the listener how they can find you. If there's anything upcoming that you want to share with the listener, feel free to share.
Oh, yeah. So now I remembered something that I feel like some people ask me is that sometimes people don't know what their purpose is in life. And I feel very blessed that I found mine very early. But a lot of people are like, yeah, but how do you find it? How do I know what mine is? So I think what's important for people is just to follow their curiosity and to follow whatever it is that interests them and to go down that path, because you might not just do something and feel automatic passion for it right away, but to just keep following your curiosity. And I think that would lead you down where you're meant to go. So I would leave listeners with that bit of advice.
I love that.
Yeah. And then they can find me on Instagram at arbs with two S's. And I also have a website, yogawitharbs.com.
Thank you so much, Arbely. This conversation has been so Wonderful. And I'm very inspired, and I'm also very excited to continue to watch your journey on Instagram to see how your life continues to unfold. So I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much for having me on, for giving me the opportunity, and also just for providing this platform for teachers to share their journey and for everyone to learn. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I really appreciate all the listeners who tune in every week to listen to this Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. If you have any requests for a special topic, or if there are a teacher that you want me to interview, or you yourself want to be interviewed for this podcast, you are always welcome to reach out to me. Best way to reach me is through Instagram. My handle is @ReikaYoga, or through my website, www.reikayoga.com. I'll put the link on the show notes, as well as a link to register for my in-person and virtual 4-year anniversary events for my online yoga studio. I hope you could make it. I'd love to see you either online or in person, or maybe even both. I'll also put the link to the workshop that Brittany is going to be teaching on Zoom, The Art of Teaching Private Yoga. So different ways to come hang out with me. I would love to see you, and I hope to chat to you again next week. Have a lovely day.